You're listening to the Money Monopolizers podcast, helping you take control of your financial destiny. It's about time that we invest more in our financial literacy and work towards building generational wealth. If you think you're ready to do the same, then you've come to the right place. Alex, Marlon, y'all ready? Let's get this bread.
What's good, everybody? It's Alex Camuño here, and we are back with episode 11 of the Money Monopolizers podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Marlon Walls. Marlon, how you doing today, bro?
I'm doing real good, man. I'm ready for another episode. I'm really excited for this one, especially because we're getting to the nitty-gritty of real estate investing. How about you?
Facts. I'm doing good, bro. You know, same old. It was a real busy day today. So right now we are recording this, and it is, as of now, 10:10 p.m.
11:10 Eastern.
Yeah, he's in the on the Eastern time, so that's even worse. But yeah, you know, we're determined to continue to put out podcasts, you know, consistently as much as we can. So you know, if we got to do this late at night, then that's what we do to, you know, stick to that. Because that's just who we are and that's what we do. So you know, we hope you all appreciate that. If you do, you know, this is a good time to, you know, go ahead, hit that 5 stars.
Boy, they dedicated, man. They dedicated.
Shoot.
I got you.
Exactly. That would be a good token of appreciation. If y'all could go ahead, give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or wherever you're listening to. You know, that helps us get to the top of the you know, search query and help reach more people. So that would definitely help us too. But yeah, we got a good episode for y'all today. Continuing our series of getting started investing in real estate. This will be part 2 today. Last week we ended part 1 where we talked about kind of determining figuring out your why and determining your goals, right? And then once you figure that out, working backwards to determine, you know, the roadmap to get to that goal. So that was the main gist of last episode. If y'all didn't see that one, don't watch this one yet. Go watch that one or go listen to that one first before you listen to this one. If you want to, you know, if you want to get the most out of this one, that's the best thing to go do, to go listen to part 1 first. It was a good episode, and we got a lot of good feedback on it. So hoping to have another good one today. I'm sure we will. So yeah, let's get into it. Like I said, last week we finished off with that, determining your goals. And this week we're going to be talking about more so how you can, you know, determine the type of property that you want to invest in based off of those goals, right? Because we talked about how you have to know where you're going in order to figure out how to get there. So in order to, you know how you're going to reach this specific real estate goal you have, this specific real estate goal you have is going to determine the type of properties that you're going to invest in. So, Marlon, what I want to ask you, you know, to get this started, what do you think is like key to determining the type of property you want to invest in?
So I think in general, whatever you choose, I think it's more so important that you focus on that one property type. Like when you first starting out, you have to learn everything there is to know about it. It's like how to finance it, what the market's demanding, property costs. So it really doesn't matter what you choose. I think it's just more so important that your property aligns to your goals, really. Like, so the property type, if your goals is to build wealth, like we'll talk about later. If I want to build generational wealth, you might want to choose multifamily. Yeah. If you want to just get quick cash, you want large sums of money, we'll talk about single family houses and how those can help you with that. Mm-hmm. So I think we'll get a lot more into that later on, but I think that's just like a good way to get started. Whatever you will choose, you need to do a whole bunch of research and figure out everything there is to know about that asset class.
Yeah, I think that's extremely, extremely important. He's talking about, you know, determining using those type of the properties to get to that goal. And last week, I kind of want to reiterate this when we talked about it last week, when I mentioned the 4 wealth generators in real estate, right? So we had equity and loan build. We had equity / loan pay down. You had appreciation, tax benefits, and we had cash flow. Those are the 4 wealth generators, right? And those kind of help determine where your goals are, right? So what are you aiming for? This is going to determine the type of property that you're going to be investing in. So what we're going to do in this episode is essentially make a case for all the property types, I would say, what we call it,
Residential.
Residential.
Yeah.
I guess we'll say residential. Yeah, because we're not going to get into commercial. That's going to be maybe in some.
I don't think they want to listen to 2 hours of us talking. So we keep it to residential.
Yeah, we'll be here probably till 1 a.m. if we talked about that. But nah. So one thing that before we start getting into the single family, multifamily, all that kind of stuff, one thing that I do want to talk about in specific is how we buy our properties and why we buy our properties the way we buy them. So what we do essentially is we only, you hear me, only buy fixer upper and value add properties, right? We don't buy anything turnkey. So a fixer upper or value add property is essentially just any property that needs renovations before it can be used for its intended purpose, right? So you're either flipping it for an end buyer or you're getting a rental ready. No matter what, it means it's in physical distress, right? It's dilapidated. It's dilapidated. There's only really two ways that you can buy properties. You can either buy it turnkey or you can buy it distressed. Turnkey, when I say turnkey, and when you hear turnkey, that essentially, depending on the context, most of the time it means that it's just fully renovated. It's also meant, I also hear it in the sense of there's turnkey investing where you can just go buy a property and someone takes care of the management, everything. They renovate it. They do everything for you. That's a different form of turnkey. When we say turnkey, we're just talking about the property being renovated and move-in ready. So that's the one way to buy a property, or you can buy it in physical distress, right? That just means it's dilapidated. It can be sold for a discount. You can't sell it for the same price as the other houses in the neighborhood until it's fixed up. Right? That it's logical, right? It's not going to be worth the same price as the other ones until it looks like the other ones. So that's how we buy properties. We only buy properties that need work, because when they need work, that means they're priced well below the potential market value, otherwise known as ARV or after repair value. That's a very common term in real estate investing. You hear that with literally every day if you are in real estate investing. So I kind of want to make a case for fixer uppers, why we like them so much and why we think they're amazing investment strategies before we get into the other stuff. So the biggest thing about it is because of the forced appreciation, right? So with fixer uppers, you're essentially able to build equity in the property through the renovations. That's forced appreciation. Remember, there's two types of appreciation. There's natural appreciation or market appreciation, and forced appreciation. Forced appreciation, you're pushing money, you're pumping money into it in order to pump up that value of it, right? So you're forcing the appreciation through the rehab, right? For example, if you have a distressed house for $75,000 and you put $20,000 into the renovations, now you're all in for $95,000, right? So now the house isn't worth $95,000. It's worth what the other fixed up homes in the neighborhood are worth. Those are otherwise known as comparable sales. So let's say that the house is worth $145,000 now after you fixed it up. You put 75, or you bought it for 75 and you put 20 into the renovation. So you're all in 95, but it's worth $145,000. So now you pretty much gained $70,000 of instant equity / net worth just by the rehab. So that's the beauty of value add and fixer uppers. And the way I look at it, and the way many people within this game look at it, they say the uglier, the nastier the house, the more potential for value. What did Marlon, what's his name say on the podcast, right? Whenever dude walked in with his kids.
Oh yeah, he's talking about so if the property smells real bad, like it's probably like doo-doo all over the place and like mud, like it smelled terrible. Yeah. The dude walked in with his kids and said, "Wait, what's that smell like, kids? Money." That's they see it's room for value add.
Exactly. So anytime you walk into a house that's super ugly, mad nasty, mad stinky, that means that you should be smelling them dollars. That's what's there. So one thing I want you to know, because it might not be easy, like a concept that's easily grabbed, but rehab costs don't really scale linearly with the value of the property. And what I mean by that is, because I know if I say, it's easy. If you've never heard this stuff before, I can say, hey, I put 75,000. Like I just said, I bought a house for 75,000 and I put 20K into it. Now, if you were just thinking logically, you would say, oh, the house must be worth 95,000. No, it doesn't scale linearly with the rehab costs. So it's not worth that 95,000. That's why there's that potential to make money. If I'm all in for the 95,000, but it's worth the 145,000. Well, like I said, that's 70,000 of potential, dollars for me to gain, because it doesn't scale linearly with it. So it did, and obviously depending on the property type, depending on the area, there's a bunch of factors that go into it, but there's always room to make money with value add. That's why it's so beautiful. And I mean, another case for it too is, as the market appreciates, it goes up from the $145,000, not the $75,000 that you got it for, right? So the new value is the 145. That's the beauty of it. There's that jump in the $70,000 in equity that you saw.
I want to make sure y'all understand this part about why it's so key for value add. So imagine he had bought that same property for 145 and it was beautiful and turnkey. Now he has a mortgage of 145 instead of that $75,000 mortgage. I think I said 145, $145,000 mortgage instead of a $75,000 mortgage. Now you have a higher interest and, well, basically a higher pity. That's your mortgage payment. You have it's probably same expenses, same utilities. But now it's not as good of a deal. So like if you go rent that same property out, your rents won't be able to cover that higher mortgage. But when it's at 75,000 and you put that 20,000 into it to help you get to 145, now you have that same mortgage and you get to cash flow because your rents will be able to cover your mortgage, and since it's less, now you have what's called cash flow. You basically pay all your expenses, and whatever's left over, you make it in as cash flow, just because you bought something that's value add instead of something that's turnkey, because you didn't want to do any work.
Yep. Me and Marlon think just alike, because I was just going to say that there's more there's more cash flow potential with every property, especially because it's based off of that that $75,000 mortgage. So that's a great point. I'm glad you mentioned that too. But another thing too with it is, I think there's a lot of unique financing opportunities within buying fixer uppers and value add properties, because I mean typically you can't really use conventional financing because banks aren't lending on that garbage, because it's just too risky for them, because they don't know what's going to happen with it. But typically there's so many other creative financing options. I mean, some of them I can mention, just the BRRRR strategy. We'll get into that a lot
Bigger pockets
more.
Turn.
Yeah, it's a term coined by Brandon Turner off of Bigger Pockets. But like I said, we're not gonna keep plugging them. But nah, we can't. We got to mention that, because that's our bread and butter. And I kind of want to, I don't want to get too deep into that, because we're gonna get into it more. So I'm gonna just mention it. You can go look it up if you want, but we'll get into it a little bit more. I think those are the primary reasons, the biggest reasons for investing in value add and fixer upper properties, right? That's why, that's why it's so lucrative on HGTV. There's so many people doing it, right? Fixer upper, flipper flop, all that. That's all they're doing, investing in value add properties, right? Because there's potential to make money there. And that's what they usually do. So, but I think, anytime we mention, those good things, we got to be completely objective and mention the downsides too. It wouldn't be right if we were just sitting here and praising everything. So one of the biggest downsides of investing in fixer uppers, and this is probably the biggest downside, is that there's going to be a lot of hidden expenses, things you can't account for. Once you start hitting down or knocking down them walls, you're going to see things that you weren't in the rehab budget. You couldn't have accounted for them until you knock down those walls. So it's a problem, and it happens all the time. So, and I know it's probably going to happen to us soon, but it comes with the territory. It's all right. Because the thing about it is really tough to accurately estimate the cost of a rehab. That is one of the hardest things in real estate investing.
Contractors is definitely a big key when it comes to your team members and who's on your team when it comes to your investment team. But also understand that they can't see through walls. So when they give you an estimate and you're about to do a full gut to a whatever it is, a single family house or whatever rental property you're looking at, or whatever investment property you're looking at, they can't see through the walls and see asbestos. They can't see mold inside the walls or something like that. So it's going to be unforeseen expenses that come up with these fixer upper properties. The alternative to all of this, if you don't want to invest in, fixer upper, if you don't want those headaches of, rehabs and all that, the alternative is to purchase turnkey, right? And you just have to put more money down, and like Marlon was talking about, your mortgages now are based off of that value that you buy it for, rather than that
discounted rate that you could have got it for if you bought it turnkey. So, or if you bought it distressed. So that's one thing that we just wanted to mention. That's not really a property type, but that's very important when we start talking about this kind of stuff, because I mean, that's just how we buy properties, and there's a reason for that. So now let's get into the property type stuff. So the first one we're going to talk about is single family. So we're going to make the case for single family. How we're going to structure this, we're going to make the case for single family, right? And then we're going to talk about, some of the exit strategies that come with it and how they're best suited for these properties. So the first thing I want to mention with single family in terms of making a case for it is that, the financing on single family is the best financing you're going to get for any type of asset class in real estate. There's no other type of asset class that has better financing. And this is primarily because, number one, owner occupants receive the best rates for these properties because these are typically who's buying these properties. So the banks want to lend, money to owner occupants because that's the safest investment for them. That's the safest strategy for them. There's a lot more stability lending to someone that's going to be occupying the property as opposed to lending to an investor that's going to be, flipping the property or doing whatever, because they know if someone is living there, they're going to make sure they pay that mortgage because that's their crib. That's where they live in. If they don't have, a place to, if they don't pay their mortgage, they don't have a place to live. But as opposed to an investor, this is from the bank's perspective. They're saying an investor, well, they're a lot more likely to default on that because at the end of the day, it's not their house. They still have their place to live. So that's kind of how they look at it, right? And typically, so with this, the interest rates are typically a lot lower for single family. And this is just in regards to conventional financing too, but the interest rates are typically a lot lower when it comes to single family. And it's for that same exact reason. There's a lot more stability on the lender side. So this is usually one reason why a lot of people start with single family houses, just because it's a lot more favorable in terms of the financing. This is the best financing terms you'll get as when you're looking at across all asset classes. I can guarantee you that. So another reason another, I think, benefit of investing in single family properties is that there's going to be a lot fewer expenses, right? And this is really in regards to the maintenance of the property, right? Because if, let's say, you're renting it out, well, if you're renting it out, the tenant, most of the time, if you have a good tenant in there, they're treating that property like the owner, like they're the owner. They're treating it like it's their home, as opposed to if they're in an apartment where they're sharing walls, they're just treating it as a temporary place. So when you have a tenant in there that's a good tenant, they're going to treat it like it's their own. They're going to pay their own utilities. That's typically how it goes. So your expenses are going to be a lot less as opposed to single or any other type of asset class. There's no common spaces or anything that you have to pay for either. So everything, typically the tenant is going to be taking care of most of everything. So another thing that I want to mention is there's going to be a lot less turnover and vacancies when you are renting them out. This is typically due for that same reason. People are treating it like their home. It's their home, not just a temporary place. They're seeing this as, I can actually raise my family. Even though they're renting, there's people that rent houses for 10 years. Just because, they're, number one, the landlord is either a sucker or they're able to, get a good rental rate and live there for a long time, and the landlord never increases the rent. That's one reason, but also just because it's more permanent than a apartment or something. So, but I think the biggest reason, if you wanted to make a case for single family, the best thing you can say about it is that there are multiple exit strategies. When we talk about exit strategies, we're talking about, when I say exit strategies, I'm just essentially just saying, like, how are you getting out of this investment, right? So if you get into a property, if you're getting into a single family property, how are you getting out of it? Are you flipping it? Are you renting it? Are you wholesaling it? What are you doing? Are you, there's a bunch of things you can do with single family because there's so many end buyers there's so many potential end users of it. So that's why there's so many exit strategies. And also, looking at it from the bank perspective again, this is the reason that there's less risk for these banks, because they know that if anything, even if you default on it, they can still at least get it sold pretty quickly, either to an investor or to another home buyer. There's a lot less risk on their end, so they can flip it, you can, as an investor, you can flip it or you can rent it. You can do whatever you want to do with it. So, and people are always looking to live in one of these single family houses. So these things combined make it, a great exit strategy. But what we want to kind of get into now is the reason that this is the most common type of exit strategy.
Yeah. So Alex mentioned a few things as far as like how single family houses have advantages when it comes to renting. Like he mentioned less turnover, vacancies. He mentioned how, and then he also mentioned how there's multiple exit strategies. So he mentioned that renting it out is one, but I think one that's even a stronger. It also depends on the market. One that's like a stronger exit strategy is the flipping. And for people who don't know what flipping is, I know I didn't know it the first time I heard it. So for people who haven't heard what flipping is before, that's basically purchasing a fixer-upper, preferably, rehabbing it, and then selling it for a profit. And that's essentially what single-family houses can be used for primarily when it comes to investing. Just like I said, it depends on the market, but typically, if you want to make the most money from single-family houses, it's probably better to flip them as opposed to hold them. So, but this also should align with your goals as an investor or just your goals in life. Like, depending on what your goals are, like if you want to build a lot of money, like immediately, it's probably better to do flips as opposed to holding it as a rental, because you don't want long-term wealth. You want money right now. Yeah. So like, and it's also good if you want to start small. So with single family houses, you don't have a whole bunch of different moving parts. You just have one house, one roof, and one of everything really. And so less things can go wrong. So even if everything went wrong, you may lose a couple $1,000, but at least you didn't invest in like this $1 million apartment building and everything went wrong and now you lost $1 million. Mm-hmm. And I think looking at it from our perspective, we want the large sums of money right now. So that's why this is what we're doing. We're trying to flip houses because we're trying to get large chunks of money to where we can segue that into larger investment vehicles, or larger investment properties like multifamily, as we'll talk about later. But that's why we're trying to make our goals align with what we're investing in.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good point too, because look, if your goal is to gain, earn capital gains and create faster wealth through forced appreciation or quickly increase your net worth, then flipping is, a space you need to be looking into. That's a great investment strategy for you because that's going to allow you to do that. There's so many advantages towards, it's really geared to do that, really. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more here in a minute, but it's really geared to do that. So, I mean, really, honestly, this is where a lot of people actually, when they say they want to invest in real estate, this is the first thing they think of. And this is where majority of people start. I mean, wholesaling too, but most people don't even know what wholesaling is. The first thing most people will hear about flipping before they hear about wholesaling. That's due to like HGTV and like all that kind of stuff. You see people fixing up houses all the time, but you don't really see people wholesaling. I think one thing to mention too with that is because it's the most common, property type in all of real estate. So for this reason, the value of properties or single family properties or single family houses are going to be based on those comparable sales in the area, not on the income it generates, right? It's based off of what other houses, fixed up houses look like. That's what we're kind of talking about. But
so like with anything, like anything that you do in life, of course, there's going to be downsides, like you mentioned earlier with fixer-uppers. I do want to point out the downsides for single families. So, well, especially like with flipping in particular. Yeah. Understand that flipping can be related to as like a job. And so like with us, we're definitely realizing that right now, because once we finish that flip, we make our money. But guess what? If you don't get another flip ever again, you would never make any more money. So like once your work stops, your money stops. It's just like that. So that's why when flipping, you have to be on it. You got to be on it constantly. And if you're not, you will literally make $0 for it forever until you get another flip. And so other things, like you also can risk going over budget. If you watch those flipping TV shows like Flip or Flop, you will hear them say that all the time. We went over budget on our rehab. It's a very common thing. We went over budget too on our rehab. So it's very common to go over budget on different rehabs, but that's why you had to have that wiggle room that I mentioned earlier, that little bit extra rehab that you can afford without actually taking a loss on the property or taking a loss on the sale. You don't want to have to sell it. You don't want to have to pay to sell it. That's the worst thing you can do. Also, sometimes when you rehab a property and you put it on the market, sometimes the market may not sometimes nobody wants to get it. Like sometimes nobody wants to buy it. So now you risk it sitting on the market for a long time. So we saw a property yesterday that sat on the market for like 1,000 days.
Yeah,
that's not to scare anybody, but
3 years.
I mean, yes, some properties will sit on there a long time, even if they are fully renovated. Somebody just may not want it. And another thing is that you may overshoot the area as far as like what you price it at. So if you thought the ARV, the after repair value, was higher than what it is, than what like it really is. So say if you thought the ARV of a home, that's the after repair value, is 160,000. So you price that at 160,000, and then everybody on the market is listing their property at like 130,000. Everybody else's property is getting bought because it's affordable in that area, and yours is not even getting looked at because nobody wants to buy something that's that high when they can buy the same similar quality at a $30,000 discount.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's still this is a great point to like reiterate. This is why it's so important to educate yourself, because you need to know things like the ARV. You need to know how much your rehab is going to be. You need to understand all these things when you go into any type of deal, so you don't be making these rookie mistakes like trying to overprice a house or something like that. Yeah. So I think that's very important to continue to educate yourself and be well versed with what's going on with your whatever investment you're going into.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you kind of talked about that, because I mean, Marlon just kind of mentioned some of the downsides of, flipping and using that as your exit strategy for single family. I think I kind of want to get into some of the, downsides of single family in general. Because right now we're talking about the property types and we're getting into the investment strategies. So, I mean, we just gave you a case for single family, and we just, said there's multiple exit strategies. I kind of want to talk about what are some of the downsides now and things that you need to be aware of if you choose to invest in single family properties, and that be your investment or asset class that you are investing in, right? The biggest thing to me, and this is my perspective on it, I seriously believe that, and I look at it like this: single family houses, having a portfolio of single family houses and investing in single family houses, they weren't necessarily built for business, right? They weren't built to cash flow. They weren't built to make more. They weren't built to make you money. So yeah, I mean, I want to kind of touch on that more so in a little bit, but I want to, I'm saying they weren't built to cash flow. I want to touch on that more so in a little bit here in a second, but I want to touch on some of the other things first before I get into that. Another thing I think that you need to be aware of with the single family is that market rent and market sales typically follow each other in single family space, right? So when the market value goes up, the rent does too. So what does that mean? That means that the mortgages that, you're not going to, that doesn't mean you're going to cash flow more. That means your cash flow potential isn't increasing, right? Because now, the mortgage is going up, but the rent's going up too. But I mean, it's canceling each other out in a sense, right? So that's one thing too to be aware of. Might not be a big deal to everyone, but it's depending on what your goal is, it could be a big deal to you. So this doesn't necessarily happen with multifamily, right? It can work. I think it can work as a rental. Like, you can, obviously people do it all the time. There's people with hundreds of single family properties as rentals. And I think it's a great strategy if you have those systems in place to operate it as a business. Those systems are very important. We could do a whole episode on having systems in place to operate, your real estate business. But if you don't have those systems in place to operate your single family portfolio, then it's going to be ridiculous, because now you're looking at having mortgages, 10, 15 different mortgages all over the country. You having properties all over the country. You have property managers all over the country. You have a team over here, You have all these different moving parts. And if you don't have those systems in place, they're going to overwhelm you and you will get cooked in this space. So it's important to know that. So like I was saying earlier, I kind of wanted to talk about why I think they weren't built to cash flow well, because I think a lot of people will hear that and really disagree with me. And I mean, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that, but I want to give my take on it just because this is, what I've thought of, and this is the mindset I kind of developed recently. But I seriously believe that, single family houses were meant to be owner occupants. And I'm not saying you can't, rent them, obviously, but they were intended to be owner occupant homes. They weren't intended to be business assets. So the nature of them alone makes it more difficult to operate them as a business if there's no systems in place, like I just mentioned, right? So now within there, you're fighting against those wannabe homeowners who are going to pay, or are going to be they're going to be willing to pay a lot more than you just because the front porch is cute or the backyard is big. So you're fighting against things that you wouldn't necessarily be fighting against in other asset classes, right? So, like I said, I think these houses were meant to, have people in there and let those people live there and let those people hold their things. That's what they were meant to do. That's why there's a mortgage on them. That's why, you pay them monthly. That's why they're structured the way they are, and the nature of them is the way they are. Because when you have it as a business and you're running it as a business, let's say you have a vacancy, right? Well, now what? Well, now it's a liability. One vacancy means it's a liability now, because now you're paying for it, right? So now you just purchased a liability. You don't have an asset anymore. And what was the upside of it? You were cash flowing something. Maybe I hope you were cash flowing when it was an asset. So that's kind of what I think about that, and that's my take on it. I don't know if you disagree. That's cool, but that's kind of how I look at it. And moving forward, that's kind of why I have my goals set the way they are, right? I want to get into multifamily later.
Single-family homes can be a great investment opportunity for your real estate portfolio. These are the most abundant type of properties out there. They offer the most favorable financing options and are typically less expensive than other asset classes. All these factors combined with the fact that they boast multiple exit strategies makes single-family homes bread and butter investments. The ability to rent or flip them has made and will continue to make many investors wealthy. But at the end of the day, your goals are what should determine if single family is right for you. Do you want to flip 100 houses a year to create large influxes of capital? Great, then this is the asset class for you. Do you want to earn passive income and become financially free through rental cash flow? Well, single family can get you there too. Just make sure you have those systems in place that will allow it to operate as a business. Otherwise, you'll be slow to scale your portfolio.
So I think now we should kind of, transition into, I just mentioned like they weren't built for business, right? So let's talk about what property is built for business, right? And this is where I want to make a case for multifamily properties because I love them so much. So with single family properties, as we just talked about, it's a lot tougher to operate them as a business and expand a portfolio of single family properties. And the primary reason of this is because of economy of scale. So economy of scale is essentially just a macroeconomics term that really describes the cost advantages that businesses obtain due to scaling their operation, right? So, for example, if it's almost always possible to buy a 6-pack of, drinks for a lower price than buying 6 single drinks, right? Or, when you call like a repairman or something to come fix something, if he comes and fixes multiple things at once, you're going to pay a lot less than if he came out multiple different times to fix the same things, right? So you see economy of scale working there. So in real estate, let's say you may be able to get 10 single family houses for $100,000 each, right? So that's essentially $100K a unit. But what if you can get a 10-unit apartment building for $750,000? So now you're paying $75,000 a unit. That's a lot better rate, right? So this essentially is just saying that your fixed costs, such as your mortgage, insurance, taxes, maintenance, etc., are spread over more units of production. So that's really what, economy of scale is. And, that's to me, the biggest reason to invest in multifamily, honestly. Like, honestly speaking, that's the biggest reason. And I think the nature of economy of scale itself inadvertently provides additional advantages for multifamily. So, now the biggest one with it is that, there's multiple units under one roof, right? So those units are a lot easier to manage and maintain. So that's, that just comes with the territory of multifamily. Another one is that the cost to construct, usually, any type of apartment buildings or multifamily is a lot lower on a, dollar per square foot basis because the units each share walls and a roof. This is a lot more technical. So, I hope you follow along what I'm saying, but, if you didn't, rewind that, go listen back to the last 1 minute.
Let me give them a nice little
And
summary. So basically, Alex is
yeah,
explaining
yeah,
economy of scale is basically when you buy multiple units and you get a discounted rate on those because you bought more at a time. So like he said with his example, if you buy 10 individual units, like 10 single family houses, they will cost more. So like his example, $100,000 per unit, they cost a total of $1 million. But if you bought a 10 unit apartment, at least you got the same amount of units, but it's going to be at a discount in comparison because now you have that's economy of scale working. You
yeah.
buy more units and at one time, now you get a discount. That's all he's trying to say.
Yeah, pretty much. So, and I think another thing too, I could, go down a list. Another reason for economy of scale is that a vacancy, I talked about it earlier when I was finishing up talking about single family. If you have one vacancy in single family, it's a liability. But now we're talking about a multifamily property, a vacancy may not hurt you. So you can have 4 units, but if one person moves out, now you still have 3 rented out. So it's not even a liability at that point. So I think there's a lot of investors that, acquire a massive portfolio of single family homes. They 1031 exchange into a cash flowing apartment complex, right? So that's pretty much meaning like they're selling their apartment complex, or they're selling their portfolio of homes and using that to buy a similar asset, which is a cash flowing apartment complex. That's a 1031 exchange is a tax law that the U.S. government provides. Remember, I talked about tax benefits as a benefit as a wealth generator. Government provides a lot of tax breaks to investors, and that's one of them. You can essentially you defer the taxes on that sale until a later date, as long as you purchase a similar asset. That's essentially what a 1031 exchange is. But like I said, single family wasn't intended to cash flow for the owner, right? It was built to be a place for families to live. But multifamily was built to be run as a business, and that's why they're valued differently. And this is another benefit of multifamily and economy of scale. And it's like another tandem of economy of scale, because when I say they're valued differently, remember we talked about with single family is the value is based on the comparable sales in that neighborhood, right? So they call it comps. What is other houses fixed up in the neighborhood worth? But with multifamily, the value is based on the cap rate and the NOI. Look, I can get into so many technical things here. Quick rundown of NOI. NOI means net operating income. And net operating income is really just, I might as well say it just because I mentioned it. It's the net income you get from the property after you pay all your expenses, right? So you have your rent, and then you pay all your expenses, so you have your net operating income. That's used to determine the value of the property, and they call that the cap rate. Like I said, with the business, the primary goal is to make a consistent income, right? So the exit strategies in multifamily are tailored towards making that consistent income, which is otherwise known as cash flow, right? So
yeah, so with exit strategies, like you said, rentals is probably going to be the best way to go with as you scale with multifamily. And like we mentioned earlier with single family, you have the option to either hold like a rental or do a flip. If you try to flip a multifamily, it's typically not nearly as used as much as it is with single family houses, mainly because it's not practical. You're not going to have an end buyer. That's going to be one big thing, but and there's a lot of different implications that go along with flipping a multifamily. But you have anything that you wanted to add with that?
I mean, one thing I want to add real quick is that, multifamily, it can be flipped. It doesn't mean it can't be. It can be. And a lot of investors do value add apartment investing or apartment flipping, which is value add. When someone says value add, that's essentially what it means. But a lot of investors do value add apartment flipping or apartment syndication. But in general, you got to think about the end buyer, right? The end buyer is, like Marlon mentioned, the end buyer are the investors, not the homeowners. So with single family, their end buyer is homeowners. There's a lot more of those, right? But with multifamily, the end buyer is typically investors. So the buyer pool is significantly smaller. So.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So understand that if you can try to flip an apartment building, you're not going to be selling to somebody who's wants to buy this beautiful porch that, like Alex mentioned earlier with the single families, you're selling to an investor. Investors want to buy at a discount anyway because they want to make value add. So understand that if you try to fully renovate an apartment complex and then try to sell it to an investor at a high price, they're not even going to want it because there's no room for that instant equity build up through value add through purchasing the fixer upper. So understand that's why it's also not practical to really start trying to flip different apartment buildings or a large multifamily. But like I mentioned earlier, it's important to understand how your investment strategy aligns with your goals. And that's how you are ultimately able to choose which property type you go into and that'll best align with whatever strategy you want to go into. So I want to just comment a little bit on like who should be targeting these multifamily rentals, like as far as who, like when we talked about goals before, whose goals align with target with going into or purchasing multifamily rentals as investment properties. So like if somebody who wants to build long-term wealth, somebody who's not looking for the big dollar signs right now, they're not looking for flip type profits, they're looking to create passive income. Passive income is in the form of cash flow, like we mentioned earlier. So with rental properties, since you're able to get those at a discount, like we mentioned earlier with economy of scale, now you're able to cash flow more per unit because each unit costs less per unit. Like if you bought 10 single family homes, they would cost $100,000 a piece in Alex's earlier example. You can get the same rents at this apartment complex that's a 10 unit apartment complex, and you only pay $75,000 per unit. Now, if you charge the same rent for the $100,000 house versus the $75,000 unit, now you get the cash flow from the unit as opposed to maybe breaking even or even having to pay extra for the mortgage on the single family home. So that's one big thing, is that the passive income is possible through scaling with large multifamilies. Mm-hmm. Another thing is the equity you build from loan pay down. So understand that when tenants are paying your rent, when tenants are paying you the rent, you get to pay your mortgage. So you never come out of your pockets physically for the mortgage. And so somebody else is paying your mortgage down, and you are in turn getting equity that's building up. Well, you're getting loan pay down that's becoming in the form of equity. As equity builds up, your net worth builds up. So that's why we said earlier, if your goal is to build long-term wealth, this is a great way to do so, because with this large of a portfolio, which is under one roof, 10 units under one roof, you can quickly start scaling your portfolio and your ultimate net worth. Do you have any other like advantages or anything, or like what you think somebody who's looking to build their net worth would want to do?
Yeah, one thing I do want to mention, just talking about building long-term wealth, is it's multifamily is extremely scalable. That's very, very practical within multifamily as opposed to other asset classes, specifically single family. We talked about it, I think, a little bit earlier, but with multifamily, you really have the ability to augment your portfolio rapidly as opposed to just buying one unit at a time. So there goes that economy of scale again. And
exactly. I gotta say it again, disadvantages, because with everything there are disadvantages. So I do want to make sure we comment on those too, just so we can stay objective and give neutral perspectives on everything. So first and foremost, when you're trying to get into multifamily as opposed to single family, there's going to be that barrier to entry. Barrier to entry meaning you may need a larger down payment to get a single family, a multifamily house as opposed to the single family. So let's think about it. With Alex's example again, that 110 unit costs $750,000. One single family costs $100,000. Which one is easier to buy first? You want to buy the single family because that may be all you can afford currently. So there's a larger barrier for entry into large multifamily. So that's only a 10 unit. Imagine if it was a 100 unit. Now you're talking about 7.5 million. So the barrier to entry gets very large very quickly when you start scaling with multifamily. So you just need larger money to get into larger projects. Another big thing with multifamily, especially like with rentals, is that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. People always say that with investing. It's especially the case when you're talking about buy and hold and rentals. Buy and hold. Hold means that it's going to be a long-term process. You're not going to become instantly wealthy over a course of 1 year, maybe not even 5 years. So it's very important to understand that when you're getting into multifamily, when you get into rentals, you're trying to build long-term wealth, because over time the properties are going to appreciate, and you're going to gain a whole bunch of cash flow over time, but it's not going to be instantaneous.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to mention one more. This is the biggest one of them all. If you're not flipping houses, if you're keeping any type of rental, whether it's a single family or multifamily, you will deal with these things called tenants. They're not things, but you're gonna feel like that. You're gonna feel like that if you got some bad ones. I can't stress to you enough. Bad tenants can break you as a real estate investor. You will easily want to be done investing altogether if you have bad tenants, and that's because with bad tenants, they are going to cause all sorts of problems. They're going to call you every day nonstop and be like, "Hey, I got this problem. My light just went out." You might hear some complaints about a tenant that's smoking in the house, that brought a dog that was unapproved in the lease. You hear a whole bunch of and that's like it's barely scratching the surface. There's a whole bunch of different things that tenants can do wrong that can stress you out as a person and kill you as an investor. So tenants is a big part of rentals, and that's a bit like we said, that's more so of a disadvantage because you got to pick the good ones.
Yeah.
But I think we should transition a little bit to the different types of multifamily, because there are two types. It's not just large multifamily. I know we've mentioned a lot about them, but there's actually two different types of multifamily investing. So there's one that's called small multifamily investing. These are your duplexes, triplexes, or quadplexes. These are 2 to 4 unit apartments that are still classified almost like when you get financing, I think I'll talk about that in a minute, it's going to be classified as like a residential type loan. This is a great way to get introduced into multifamily without having the burden of having that large barrier to entry. So with these small multifamily units, they don't follow that NOI rule with that large multifamilies do, like Alex mentioned earlier. So NOI, that's how properties are valued when it's large multifamily. Small multifamily are similar to how single family houses are valued. They are valued based on comparable sales. So basically comps in the area, how different multifamily houses are selling for. Small multifamily properties are selling for in the area. That's how these properties are valued. And it's kind of like a hybrid. So like I mentioned earlier, the financing for small multifamilies is very similar to the single families, because you can get those same owner-occupant type loans. So I think we mentioned this in episode 5, the house hacking episode. That was my favorite one, where you can basically get a low down payment loan called an owner-occupant loan, and you'll be able to live. So in this case, with small multifamily, you can live in one unit for as low as 3% down, and rent out the other units. That's something we talked about. That's house hacking. That was a great episode. If y'all haven't listened to that one, go listen to that. But that's a great way to get into small multifamily with a low down payment loan. That's the beauty of it being like a residential type of loan. And you also get to reap the benefits of it being a multifamily property in general. You have 4 units for the price of a low down payment owner-occupant loan. And I guess to compare it, to relate it to your goals, it's great if you want to have a cash flowing property in general. So like that's why it's better as a rental than it is as a flip, more likely, because you get to have greater cash flow. You have more units under one roof. Economy of scale. There it is again. And I think we should also mention the downsides, because with everything, there's always downsides. Understand with small multifamilies, they're not very abundant. They're not enough. There's not a whole bunch of them in any area. I mean, some areas are greater than others, but like in Houston, San Antonio, I don't know how much you have out there. I know up here in Lafayette, Indiana, I probably saw like 5 in all the city.
Yeah, good ones at least are few and far between. Typically, they're overpriced.
That's a big one right there, overpriced, because at this stage of the market, everything is priced real high because it's like a high demand currently for these properties. So people price a duplex for like $300,000, and you're only going to be able to get rents for like $1,000 per unit. And now if you are well versed with your real estate terms and real estate information, you understand that's probably a terrible deal, because the mortgage won't be able to be offset by the rent.
Yeah.
But let's get a little more technical. But I just want to keep it just saying that it's overpriced in a lot of areas, so that makes it not a good deal ultimately. And lastly, I think I mentioned this earlier, it's based on comps instead of NOI. So you really can't increase the value as much as you could for like a large multifamily. There's less room to increase the value because no matter how good you may perform with, like, as far as your finishes and like if you do rehab in the property, no matter how good your finishes are, no matter how much you're charging for rent, it's only going to appraise, or like you only will be able to sell it for so much in comparison to like another small multifamily that's in the area, because that's what your really the worth of that property is going to be based upon. It's the small multifamilies in that area. And lastly, I want to say another downside is that there's a lot of competition with other investors. So especially when somebody's trying to do like a house hack, like we mentioned earlier, there'd be a lot of people that's trying to get into properties that way. So if you want to just invest in a small multifamily without living in it, it's going to probably be a lot harder for you to get it, or it's a lot harder for it to make sense for you as opposed to somebody else that's looking to house hack the deal.
Mm-hmm. And I think sorry, it's 11 o'clock. I'm tired, but I think I kind of want to get into some of the, because you talked about some of the downsides from small multifamily. I think some of those end up being, upsides for large multifamily, really just in reality. And I think I kind of want to get into large multifamily a little bit to close out this episode as we do. But sorry. The thing about, large multifamily is that large multifamily, and this is anything, when we say this, like Marlon says, anything that's 5+ units. So small as 2 to 4, 5+ units means it's large multifamily, and then it's considered, commercial at that point, commercial residential almost. But that's just how it goes in terms of financing. But with that comes the fact that it must be treated as a business. You cannot operate these asset classes with the same mindset as you do with a single family. Good luck. You will fail. I can guarantee you that. And I mean, primarily, this is really because they're designed for investors to own, and they're designed for management companies to operate them. And so it's designed to be hands off. It's not designed for one fool to just go in there and, try to, let me manage 100 people on my own. No, it's not designed for that. It's designed for investors and management companies. It's designed for business, right? So because of that, that means that its value is based on the income, right? So we talked about it a little bit with multifamily. I'll talk about it a little bit more in detail right here, but its value is based on the income it generates rather than the comps, right? So you can't use the comps because you can't compare. I feel like I need to mention it. Comps are the comparable sales in the property or of other properties in the area, right? So you can't use those comparable sales because you can't compare a 30-unit apartment building to another 30-unit apartment building because they aren't exactly the same, right? They're not two 30-unit apartment buildings, even if they're in the same area. They could be next door to each other, but they're not the same. So if the way they look at it is in terms of financing or value, I mean, they're saying, hey, if this property over there, that 30-unit gave this investor a 10% return, then this one should also, right? That's how they value them, based off of, when you're looking at similar properties. They're looking at it based off of the income it's generating. So that, brings me to what is known as cap rate. So I kind of mentioned it here, and I feel like I have to mention it now just because I'm talking about large multifamily. I was trying to avoid it over here, but I realized I need to, just because, it's literally like the essence of large multifamily. So cap rate is essentially just the formula for it is NOI, like I talked about earlier, net operating income over the purchase price. So your net operating income is the income that you receive after you pay your expenses, right? So that's your net operating income divided by the purchase price. That'll give you the cap rate. So that is essentially telling you what, the return you're getting on that property is. So for example, let's say you have a 30-unit and you buy it for $1 million, and let's say you can rent each unit for $2,000, and let's say that the gross income on that is $60,000, right? So before you pay all your bills, all those units, so 20 times or 2,000 times 30 is 60,000, right? So And let's say you have $10,000 worth of expenses, right? So now your net operating income is that 50,000. So your cap rate would be your 50,000 divided by your 1 million, right? So you 50,000 divided by 1 million is 5%. So that's essentially known as a 5 cap. They call that a 5 cap. So that's a little more technical, but that's what that is. And it's important to know that. So the reason this is extremely beneficial in this asset class is because you can increase the value of the property internally just by increasing the income. Sorry, that's my oven. You could increase the value of the property just by increasing the income or lowering the expenses, right? And like savvy investors use this to their advantage. They're finding any type of way to increase the income, right? Laundry rooms, parking spaces, garages, shoot. I don't know, anything. They're increasing the income any way they can or trying to lower those expenses. That means the value, it's worth more now, right? Because it's value based off of the income. So that's extremely important to know. That's very brief. And, we just kind of want to touch on it. We can go into it more in detail in the future, but those are the key things to know about, large multifamily in terms of the financing and the value of it. So one other thing that I think is a huge advantage for it is that there's a lot less competition from homeowners, right? You're only competing with investors. Please go find me a homeowner that's trying to put, a FHA loan or a down payment on the 30-unit apartment building. So you're only competing with investors, right? It's one of those. It's the downside of something else is the upside of something else, right? You're not competing with people that are looking for cute porches or anything. So, but talk about the upsides. Like Mona said, we got to talk about the downsides, right? So, same thing for small multifamily. It's a lot more expensive. He was saying what, $750,000 for 10. Now we're talking $7.5 million for, or he said, what'd you say, $750,000 for 10? And we talk about, oh yeah, so 7.5 million. Yeah, 7.5 million for 100 units. Yeah, exactly. That's once again the largest barrier of entry, right? It's very, very expensive. So usually because of this, nobody just has, because usually what you got to do is put 20% down. I don't have 20% of 7.5 million. Yeah, 7.5 million in my bank account. So what the investors do is they raise capital through syndication to fund these deals. So syndication, that's essentially just very brief, whenever you are, looking for other investors to put money in to buy the apartment building together, right? And each person benefits off of that monetarily, obviously. So that's typically how people get into it. It's a lot more expensive. And because of that, whole syndication thing, that makes it also another barrier for entry because it's not, it's not nothing to play with. I promise you, it's not nothing to play with. And so, and I think, one of the biggest downsides of this is that there's a lot more moving parts with this kind of stuff. So, we're talking huge, regulations now. We're talking the SEC. SEC is the Securities and Exchange Commission. That's the one. They're the ones that regulate all these kind of big deals. So, look, that's the government. So if you're not doing these things right, bro, you'll be in an orange jumpsuit, bro. $1.26 per hour. So make sure if you messing with them, then you know what you're doing. So, but
taking more risk.
Did you want to add something to that?
No, you just taking more risk by not knowing what you're doing as you scale up. Like I mentioned earlier, if you make a rookie mistake at this level, it's a lot more high. Consequences are a lot higher as opposed to that $100,000 single family house. Just understand that. That's why it's always important to know what you're doing.
Yep. So. Who is it for though? So who is this large multifamily for? I think it's great if your goal is to have a high net worth and cash flow. This is for you. This should be one of your goals. This should be the type of property you're looking to invest in at some point. Doesn't have to be now, but at some point. That's great if that's your goal, right? Like I said at last episode, my goal is to acquire large multifamily properties. So what am I doing now? I work backwards from that. I'm trying to, earn that capital now so I can get to that point. So, but what I'm doing right now is, I'm trying to build that credibility as an investor so that when I get to that point, it's going to be a lot easier to do it. Credibility is extremely important whenever you're raising capital because it's all about trust and credibility. You can have the best, pitch or whatever, but if you have no credibility and people don't trust you, you're not going to get a dime from anyone because look, I know just from my perspective, I'm not gonna give my money to someone that's only done 3 residential deals. This dude come to me asking me for $50,000 for his syndication, and I'm saying, oh, let me see your portfolio, and he's done a house hack and a flip and a rental.
They might even know what house hack is. They'd be like, man, listen, that's the bottom of the barrel type thing.
Yeah, bro. So that's really who it is. But
Man, I can't express to you enough though how important credibility is. Like you really don't even need any money if you have done deals and you can show for it. Like what you're talking about. You can bring people together that will invest in you and your vision. If you know what you're talking about, if you had a credibility, like somebody like Grant Cardone, he might not have to put a dime into an investment deal because he has a credibility that says, "Hey, I'm going to get you your money back." So. Y'all invest in me. I'll invest in this deal, and I'll bring you a return on your money. That's what syndication looks like. So understand that credibility is like a huge thing when it comes to like trying to get into large multifamilies and trying to raise money for it. Alex is over here trying to get his food out right now.
My fault.
All right, Alex is about to burn his house down.
I had to put.
That thing beeped like 15 minutes ago, I swear.
No, it means it was preheated. That was a preheated one.
Oh, so you finally put your food in the oven.
Yes, bro. We finna finish this, and I'm finna eat. Starving.
But at the end of the day, though, understand that you don't have to limit yourself to one type of investing. Just make sure that it aligns with your goals at the very end of the day. Whatever your goals are, work backwards. Know what your goal is and answer what investment should I invest in based off of what my goals are. And like I said earlier, the key thing is knowledge. Without the knowledge, you won't succeed in no matter what you choose. You can choose single family, multifamily, all the families, whatever. You're not going to succeed in anything without the knowledge.
Big facts. So look, each type of asset and asset class has a new set of guidelines. So I think it's important you got to start with one and focus on that one. So once you've established your goals and determine the type of investing you want to do, the next step after that is determining the market and the location you want to invest in, because every market isn't completely the same and they're not all going to support your strategy. Like in Los Angeles might not be the best market to acquire rentals. So you got to be able to analyze a market and pick which one is best for your strategy, and that's kind of what we're going to get into next week. So stay tuned for that. But yeah,
the power of multifamily real estate is strong. When done correctly, multifamily investing allows you to easily take advantage of all 4 of the wealth generators of real estate: appreciation, tax benefits, cash flow, and equity buildup. However, multifamily investing truly requires a mindset shift. As I said earlier, it has to be operated as a business, even on a small scale. It's one thing to acquire a single-family rental as your first investment property, but when you acquire even a small multifamily property such as a triplex, things become a little bit more complex, especially if you're just treating it as a side hustle rather than a business. That being said, just like with single family, your goals are what should determine if this is the right asset class for you to begin investing in. If your goal is to obtain financial freedom through real estate investing and build large wealth, I would highly advise you to consider investing in multifamily property. Whether you choose to house hack your way through or become a syndicator, you'll see the power of multifamily no matter the size of the investment.
And shout out to you if you're listening to us on YouTube right now. We ain't got the same lighting that we got usually, but we made it work. It is now 11:24 p.m. What?
12:24 p.m. a.m. Eastern.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Look, bro, like, come on now. We over here up at 12:30 a.m. trying to put our podcast out for y'all. So please, hook us up with a rating. Come on, bro. I don't mean
subscription. Like, a share.
I'm thirsty for them. Something.
We just trying to give back, man. If y'all so back into us just with something similar, it's free.
Free game, bro. We giving free games. So that's it for this episode of the Money Monopolizers podcast. New episodes will be released every Thursday and will be available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube on Friday. Just search Money Monopolizers wherever you listen to podcasts. We hope you learned something of value today. If you did, we'd appreciate it if you rated us and left us a review on Apple Podcasts. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube. You can also find out more info about us on Twitter at Money Monopolizers, at or on IG at Money Monopolizers. We post informative content on there that'll keep you engaged. So check that out and share those posts. But until then, we out of here.
You've been listening to the Money Monopolizers podcast, helping you take control of your financial destiny. To learn more about how you can be in control of your money, visit moneymonopolizers.com. We'll catch you next time when Alex and Marlon share more personal finance and wealth creation tips with you. Now it's time to take action.